Hey, this is Kirk.
And this is Byrd. It's the Kirk and Byrd Show. Hey, we are thrilled to have with us best-selling author Ron Peterson Jr., who is from our hometown, Hampton, Virginia. But I'm even more proud of the fact that he's a graduate of Bethel High School, class of '83. All right, I just missed you because they didn't have the middle school thing and all that. But he was also a great baseball player in the Peninsula District and went on to play college baseball at Radford. And he's got some interesting stories about that. But one of the things we're really excited about is he's a best-selling author, and he has some really fun stories about that process and how he got to be an author. But his genre is true crime stories. So welcome, Ron, to the show.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Rusty. Yeah, and you're too kind. I was never a great player. I don't know if I was even good, but
over the years, we all
everybody's a star that comes.
I was the best fullback in Bethel history now, but what my kids think. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Mine know better with me. So.
So I'll start off with we want to talk about where you can find us, and that is on YouTube, the Kirk and Byrd BYRD show, and all of our podcasts. The audio portion can be found on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, and Google if you want to listen to them. So
you can. Well, I just also want to say you can find Ron. You can Google Ron Peterson Jr., but he also has a website, ronpetersonjr.com. Okay, right. And there's a lot of other ways you can find him, but we're going to give you a chance to promote some of those things. We're going to overlay it too, Ron.
Yep,
that's awesome. Great.
Yeah. So basically, what we wanted to do, this is a sports podcast, and we know that the baseball community down Hampton, Newport News, Yorktown, but finding out about you being a best-selling author and the books that you've written, as we told you, we did quite a bit of research for the Under the Trestle book, which was kind of your first book. But before we get into that, and we want to talk about that one because it's got Radford, Virginia Tech ties, and we both know a lot of people. Rusty's brother played football for Virginia Tech. I went to Virginia Tech. But why don't you tell us about how you got into writing books, and then we'll segue into this fascinating case and book for Under the Trestle.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Kirk. That sounds great. Yeah, as you mentioned, I went to Bethel High School, was born and raised in Hampton, and was, high school, I was barely an average student, I would say, long about my junior year, had no idea what in the world I wanted to do, if I wanted to even go to college, played baseball and you said, I might've been good when I was 12 years old, but, everybody tends to catch up. Right. But, one day in English class, my English teacher, and again, I think this was 11th grade, her name was Helen Darnell, and we had turned in English papers, and she asked me to stay after class that day. So everybody left the class, and I, went up to her desk, and she was grading a paper, and she finally looked up. I thought I was in trouble, and she said, "Has anybody ever told you you're a good writer?" She said, "I always read your papers first. They're always really good." And no one had ever told me that. I just, had no idea. She said, "I want you to write for the school newspaper here at Bethel." It was called the Bear Facts newspaper. And so I said, sure. And I also had a love for sports. So she said, "You know what? You can write about sports. You can be our sports writer. And, if you like it, maybe even sports editor." So it's exactly what I did. I started writing sports. I covered all the sports in high school, was sports editor. I worked on the layout and the headlines, as you do in the newspaper my senior year. And, really enjoyed it, decided I wanted to do that, to, major in journalism in college. And then had aspirations of playing baseball in college. Went 1 year to a junior college, which, back then there were a lot of junior college options for folks that, thought they might be a late bloomer, and could eventually play at a Division I level, which clearly I wasn't, in that category. So I went to Ferrum for a year. And then it just so happened, just right place, right time, Radford University was starting a Division I baseball program. And the way it worked out, they They were going Division I in other sports. They were joining the Big South Conference, which is a conference Radford's in to this day, and they needed to add another sport. And all the other schools had baseball, so they added baseball. They did it at the last minute. So what ended up happening for the 1985 season, it was a bunch of guys who were just, for the most part, just kind of average to good high school players, certainly not Division I players. We played a 28-game Division I schedule, had no home field. Our coach was a graduate student who was there getting his master's degree in PE. Really didn't know a lot about baseball. We had no uniforms till about 3 weeks into the season, so we borrowed uniforms from someone who was a trainer in the Phillies organization. And we were 4-26 that season, and we lost games by football scores. Lost a doubleheader to Liberty University, 18-1 and 23-2, I think. Lost one game, 38-0. To Campbell University, which got
Wow.
the other team set I think 3 NCAA records. He went 8 for 8 with 4 home runs. I pitched some, that season. It was me pitching and the outfielders catching. And and then as throughout college, Radford got a lot better. Got scholarships. They got some good coaches in, and then I didn't make the team after my the fall of my sophomore year, and then I began writing for the school newspaper there. My senior year was a sports editor of the Radford University student newspaper.
Oh.
And also worked in the sports information department. We would do all the internal publicity and stats and everything for home games. Traveled with some of the sports teams on the road and covered their games for the local media outlets. Did
Hey,
some.
Ron, can I ask you a question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
While I'm thinking about it now, that season of playing baseball, and you guys were getting kind of crushed. But was there ever a time, did you play anybody that went on to maybe play in the majors, like in any of those other schools? Do you have a story about that, or do you remember any particular athlete?
But we sure did, and I'm glad you asked. There were about half dozen guys we played against, and one in particular, we played Coastal Carolina University down near Myrtle Beach.
Mhm.
They won the College World Series many years later, and they had a catcher by the name of Kurt Manwaring, who at the time was the best college player I'd ever seen. He ended up catching, I think, 15 years in the major leagues with the Padres and the Giants. Played in an All-Star game. It's probably the best catcher the Giants have ever had.
Wow.
Just an incredible player. Their coach was a guy named Bobby Richardson, who's a New York Yankees Hall of Famer.
Mhm.
Was I think a 2-time World Series MVP. It was a lot of really, really good players to play against, and a great experience there.
Oh,
And
cool.
and then after college, continued to do some writing, and kind of got sidetracked in my 20s. I worked in a newspaper environment and made a mistake. I noticed the guys that seemed to me were wearing the nice suits and driving the nice cars and picking up the beer tabs were the ones selling advertising for the newspaper. And kind of transitioned into that. Always had sort of a sales personality. Lived in Northern Virginia, moved back to Hampton Roads, worked for the Virginian Pilot in advertising. And then probably for the bulk of my career with Cox Media and television advertising, a lot of the 30-second TV commercials you would see were ones that we sold and designed and produced, and did that and got away from writing, although was always, active in it, just kind of writing some freelance things on my own. And then about the time I was late 40s, getting ready to turn 50, you have those moments where you look back and think of things you wanted to do and maybe you never did. I'd always wanted to write a book, and spent about a year writing a book about that first season of playing baseball at Radford. The working title was Low and Away. And it was, I kind of wrote it as a funny book, kind of a bull, in terms of movies, like Bull Durham meets Animal House, about a lot of the funny things that happened. The time I mentioned playing Liberty University, and Jerry Falwell was in the dugout heckling us, and just some of the things that happened that season. And as you do as an author, started trying to market it to publishers and to literary agents. And had no luck with that. Spent about a year spending a lot of time sending out hundreds of letters and emails and following up. And finally, a literary agent from Richmond called me, and I got pretty excited about it. And she said, "Listen, I read the sample chapter you sent me," and she said, "I don't think there's a viable market for this book." She said, "But it's not because you're a bad writer." She said, "You're actually, you're okay. You're good enough to publish a book." She said, "But this genre, it's a very thin market, and there's not a lot of people who would buy your book." We talked a little more, and she started talking to me about genres of books that are popular. You think if you go into a Barnes and Noble or the books you see on Amazon, and one of those she mentioned was the true crime genre. And I was talking about it with you guys off the air, and it's tremendously popular. Not only books, but there's true crime podcasts that I've been on. All the shows now, all the Friday night broadcast network television shows are about true crime. Dateline.
Dateline, yeah.
Yep. Oprah Winfrey, who's one of the most savvy media people, her network now is all true crime. There's the Investigation Discovery Channel, and so it was as if that kind of cartoon light bulb clicked off for me, and I knew exactly what I wanted to write about, and it was a murder story, a true story, and what happened? It eventually became my first book, and the time I was at Radford University, there was this rumor, you'd call it an urban legend nowadays, that there was a girl buried on campus somewhere, either under the sports arena there or in a clandestine grave somewhere. And I didn't really believe it until, one day one of my roommates came home. He was a criminal justice major. He actually went on to become a homicide detective, as a side note. But he said he had a lecture in a criminal justice class about that case. And, I was all ears. And what it was, the true story was in 1980, a Radford University freshman by the name of Gina Renee Hall, who is just an outstanding young lady from the town of Coburn, Virginia, in Southwest Virginia. Wonderful person, high morals, great family. She went out to a bar in Blacksburg called the Blacksburg Marriott Lounge. Back in the 70s and 80s, that was kind of the place to go if you were going out dancing. Radford and Blacksburg are only about 10 minutes apart. And went out for a night of dancing there, and she was never seen again to this day. And what made the story more interesting was they convicted a man of her murder without her body. And this was the first time it had ever happened in Virginia. And you think about if you've ever done jury duty, how hard it would be as a juror to vote that someone killed someone if you didn't even have, the biggest item of evidence, their body. So I was intrigued by that story from the very beginning. And as I studied it, there were people in law enforcement speculated about, what this guy might have done with her body. Now the sports tie-in was very interesting and further piqued my interest. But the killer, his name was Stephen Epperly. He's now 70 years old. Spoiler is he is still in prison to this day in Virginia penitentiary, in a Virginia penitentiary. And he was a former Virginia Tech football player. He went to Radford High School. One of his first coaches in high school happened to be Frank Beamer, who was in his first job there as an assistant coach at Radford High. And he didn't actually see action for Virginia Tech. He played with them one spring, but was a pretty well-known guy there. And in the murder trial, which was, the more I read about it, was just fascinating. One of his best friends testified against him, who was another former Virginia Tech football player named Bill King.
Bill King.
Bill King was probably best known as a fullback or blocking back for Roscoe Coles, who was Virginia Tech's first 1,000-yard rusher back in the day. In the I think that was the early to mid 70s. So I decided that was what I wanted to write about. And the first thing I would have to call the people who were involved in the case, the prosecutor, the detectives that investigated the case, the killer's family, the victim's family. And as I started making those phone calls, everybody I called was very, I called them kind of to get their permission to interview them. They were very receptive about it. They said, hey, we've always wanted someone to write a book about this. First person I called was the prosecutor. His name is Everett Shockley. He was only 28 years old in 1980. He had just been elected Commonwealth Attorney for Pulaski County.
Where like 7 months, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he was, he knew this guy had killed Gina Hall and wanted to prosecute the case, but he was missing that biggest piece of evidence, her body, to prove that she was actually dead. The killer had hidden her body or buried it, or, had done something with it. And so he went against everyone's advice. There were even judges who were advising him, not to prosecute. They said, he'll be found not guilty. And then even if the body does show up because of double jeopardy, you won't be able to prosecute again. So really creatively, he built this case against Steve Epperly, entirely circumstantial evidence. It was the first time in a Virginia courtroom that dog tracking evidence was presented. What he did, there was a famous dog tracker who had a prize German Shepherd who was really good at following a scent trail. A full 11 days after the murder, he went to the spot where the victim's car was found. And the dog followed a trail from the car to his house where he lived actually with his mom and dad, kind of this mile circuitous route over a railroad trestle and into the town of Radford. And but that evidence was presented in a courtroom, which was just a fascinating thing. The victim's father testified. The killer's mother testified about some evidence that she had provided that was used. And the star witness in the trial, and I'm giving a lot away, but I think that folks would still enjoy the book, even though they know this, was a former Virginia Tech quarterback by the name of Bill Cranwell, who Steve Epperly visited 2 nights after Hall disappeared. And he I won't give it away, but he made some incriminating statements, and then Bill Cranwell ended up testifying against him in court. But anyway, just a fascinating case. So I wrote it all, ended up interviewing over 100 people for it. Found the trial transcript. It's actually the Library of Richmond. They have an audio recording of the week-long trial. I went there and listened to the entire trial. Heard all the witnesses. Just really, fascinating. And I sort of wrote the book, as mentioned the show earlier, Law and Order, the original Law and Order, where it just goes in chronological order where a crime is committed. They interview suspects, they find the prime suspect, he's charged, and then he goes to trial. So I kind of wrote it in that kind of format, just kept it simple and straightforward because it was such a good story. And the book did exceptionally well. I've sold over 50,000 copies of the book. I sold the audio rights to Audible. It's out in paperback and Kindle, and even sold the movie rights to a documentary film producer called Scott McTavish of McTavish Pictures, who had always really had an interest in the case, read the book, liked it. And he and I are working now and have begun filming a documentary film, which, as you also know, true crime documentaries are super popular on Netflix. And he has commitments from a few streaming services, for it to air once it's completed. And we were in Radford a month ago. Cool thing is, all the people that interviewed for the book, I mentioned the prosecutor, even the 2 defense attorneys who were court-appointed attorneys who represented the killer who was convicted. They were interviewed and shared some of their experiences, about what he was like as a client, shared as much as they could without violating attorney-client privilege.
Right.
And then even some police officers who were involved in the investigation. So, the plan is it'll be an interview-based documentary film, and looking at hopefully having that out by the end of the summer. We'll have screenings at local theaters, limited screenings, in Blacksburg, Radford, where the story is really popular, as well as here in Hampton Roads, and then it would be available on streaming services. So that's kind of the story of my first book. And then after that, almost like a band that has a good first album, and then it's like, what do we do as a follow-up? But
right.
I had several of the law enforcement folks I interviewed told me a good topic for another book. And a really cool thing that happens with people that work in, whether it's with the state police or even the FBI or U.S. Marshals, but they've got all these great crime stories that they want somebody to tell them. And so I had a lot of those people contact me, and I've written 2 books since, and both of them, with the help of the people that actually worked the cases. One's called Chasing the Squirrel, but it's about a drug smuggling pilot back in the 80s who was this incredible daredevil pilot who smuggled marijuana into the United States. And then in 1984, he just disappeared. And a lot of people think he's still alive, living on the millions of dollars he made. And then my 3rd book, which came out in the fall, is called Eyes of a Monster, and takes place in our old hometown in Hampton, Virginia. It's about a series of cold case murders from the 70s and 80s that were never solved. And in 2011, a cold case detective by the name of Randy Mayer with Hampton Police reopened one of the cases, began working it as a cold case in the spare time. Hampton doesn't have a cold case unit, so detectives just do it on their spare time. And 40 years after the murder, he identified a suspect, brought him in for interviews. The guy was in his 60s by then, and they eventually brought charges against him. And I won't give away how that story ends, but just an incredible story that if you're from Hampton, you'll recognize a lot of the names and the people in the story. And then if working now on 2 other books after that, have another documentary project with my 2nd book, a company in California called Urban Legends Film Company, who acquired the rights to it, who are working similar to the Under the Trestle project with McTavish Pictures, for a documentary-based television or movie, about that. So it's kept me busy, and fortunately, I've been blessed and been able to transition into doing this more or less full time. So
okay.
Yeah,
That's what I was going to ask. Is this able? It's a passion and you enjoy it, but you're doing this like full time now?
Yeah, I am. It's been some adjustments. Early on, I had to go out and mow some lawns on weekends to do that. I'm not kidding, really. I kind of left.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I kind of left corporate America to do what I really wanted to do. Right after one son graduated college and my daughter started college. So, but yeah, it's worked out well. I also do a lot of lectures. What I really like to do is be on the college lecture circuit, lecturing with criminal justice departments. My book Under the Trestle was used as a textbook at Radford University which has a great criminal justice program for students, and gave paid lectures there, as well as at several community colleges, and then have several more of those in the work, and then speaking at a legal convention in Virginia Beach next weekend. So there's a lot of speaking opportunities there that can kind of help support my livelihood as a writer.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Ron, I'm excited to have you on.
I was going to say we're not in a production, so go ahead, Rusty.
But I just want to say this is so cool. I get first rights because he's a Bruin. All right, so I think this is so cool, man, and I'm really proud of you. I would love for you, when this stuff is aired, come back on the show. I want you to promote it, but I want to make sure our audience knows. Hey, no, now you can watch this here, where you can stream it or whatever. But this is amazing. Like I love what you've been doing. I think your story is interesting, and I'm excited about the next projects you have, but I love the ones that I've already read about. Yep. And so this is awesome. Let me ask you this: when you first started doing did you have people that said, or family or anybody say, well, why are you doing this? I've been married for 20 years, and I have things I like to do like this. And people will go like, what do you really think is going to happen? I mean, were there any naysayers? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, there were. My wife rolled her eyes more than once, when projects are not getting done around the house and so forth. And, so she was. Fortunately, both of my kids were pretty supportive. Which was good. And I found out, as far as my time, and I was working full time in corporate America when I started writing, but I kind of had to give up other things. For example, I stop playing golf. You know, I know a lot of people ask me, how do you have the time to do this? You know, they're out spending 8 hours on a Saturday playing golf or 4 hours at poker night on a Thursday night, you know? So I guess I was able, you know, to manage my time well enough that I, you know, as far as my immediate family didn't give me a lot. But, you know, what was interesting, I would tell people the story, you know, about the Gina Hall murder case. You know, I can remember being at a New Year's Eve party and telling a group of people, and they were like, you know, oh my God, unless you're the worst writer, this is going to be a good book, because that story is just incredible.
Yep.
So yeah, there were, you know, I had some friends that were skeptical, you know, and then when the book came out, I had a few people who bought it and didn't tell me, because they said if they read the first chapter and it sucked, they just weren't going to tell me they bought the book, right? So that's
right.
Yeah.
We're not on your level, but I can relate in this way. It's like 7 months ago when I told my wife, Kirk and I are going to do a podcast, and she's like, yeah, okay. And I'm telling my friends, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, you're really doing something. So not on your level, but I remember some of that.
Oh, I love what you guys are doing, and some of the guests you've had. You know, I was flattered when you asked me. You know, I saw Mike Burnup a while back on the show, and the show with Kurt Newsom out at Emory and Henry, which is a special place, and he's a great guy, an old Phoebus guy, obviously. But you guys have had some awesome guests, and I feel fortunate to be one of them. So you guys have done great.
We're honored to have you, and we want to give credit to classmate of Phoebus, Tim Baxter, who also played baseball at Radford. So, you know, as I told you, we're sports podcasts, and we love talking about sports, but we're going to transition to that. Before we do, and by the way, that exchange before is because we don't have a studio. You know, if we had an earplug, someone would say, okay, Rusty's going to take the next question. We do have some hand signals, but this case, and we won't give it away, Ron, but Rusty and I both, I think I listened to about 3 or 4 hours of podcast, and it is so fascinating. There was one interview that I watched where I just thought they tied in Virginia Tech football kind of to up it. And that's just a byproduct. So, you know, it's interesting. We're from Hampton Roads, and I cannot wait to read, you know, the Hampton Roads book, which is Eyes of a Monster. But, you know, the Marriott, when I got to Virginia Tech, it was a big dance place, huge, and was not uncommon for people to come over from Radford. And then you're probably going to remember this. We would go to Radford to go to the bus stop, Sackett's, places like that. And then, you know, Clater Lake, which is where the house was, where Gina went to. My fraternity used to have our spring picnic there. And then Gina was from Coburn. My mom's from Wise. Coburn's one town over. That's where I saw Rocky and the Bad News Bears. But it's a great read for anybody that went to Tech, that went to Radford, anywhere. It's a fascinating case, and there's all kinds of facts. We're not going to give it away, but the way this all went about, and you know, the witnesses in it are just spectacular. But now, before we transition to talking about the good old days growing up in Hampton and, you know, high school ball and American Legion, the things like that, why don't you tell us again, our listeners, where they can buy your book? I know Amazon, I looked, but go ahead and we'll let you plug it.
Yeah, Amazon's probably the best way, you know, and more Amazon sells, you know, more books than all the other retailers combined, you know, obviously. Some of the individual Barnes and Nobles I've worked closely with, not all of them carry the book, but, you know, they can order it and it's available next day. So I'd say, you know, Barnes and Noble or Amazon. And then I guess just 2 other things I wanted to say. I usually try to work in when I talk about this, but one of the other things that's made this story so compelling is, to this day, you know, people speculate on where Gina Hall's remains could be, you know, and the book gets into it. And there's even, I'm doing an updated version because there's so many other theories, you know, about where she could be, about, you know, just what the heck this guy did with her body. You know, it's so such a macabre thing, but
and he won't tell. He comes up for parole, and he still won't.
Exactly. And, you know, since the book has come out, we did a book tour, myself and some of the people, the law enforcement folks and attorneys that are in the book. And we would have prison guards, correctional officers who would come to these things, and we'd have questions and answers, and they'd raise their hand and tell stories about what a sociopath this guy still is to this day behind bars.
Wow.
You know, the sick things he's done. I had one correctional officer tell me a story about they let him out of prison to go to his mother's funeral in the town of Radford. But to do that, he had to wear a 70,000 volt stun belt that was locked to his waist, that with a key fob, the correctional officers could, you know, press a button and it would put 70,000 volts in his kidneys. But just one of the crazy little stories that I've learned since. So, but anyway, just how compelling the story continues to be. You know, and then the other thing, out of respect to Gina Hall and her family, you know, so often with true crime, a lot of the conversation is about the killer, but I mentioned early, you know, just what an outstanding person she was. You know, a documentary will certainly portray that. You know, very high morals, Christian values, and, you know, there's no doubt she was clearly not the kind of girl who would leave a bar with a guy. And the book gets into the reasons why. You know, nor would she have gone to this lake house that she was eventually murdered at, you know, to hook up with a guy. So, you know, that needs to be said about her and with respect to her and her family, which, you know, hopefully I've done a good job with the book as a, you know, a tribute to her. Most people that read it certainly feel that way. So anyway, that's my last comments about it.
So we'll round out with the book, and Rusty, I'll let you get into, you know, growing up in Hampton. He was born in Dixie Hospital. He went to Kraft, which is kind of Jeff Davis. But the book is fascinating. It's a fascinating case, and it just so happens to be, you know, Radford, Virginia Tech, and there are a lot of details that we haven't talked about. But you know, these days, a lot's happening. You know, and I don't know if I mentioned, but when I first got to Virginia Tech, I'd heard about a girl that left a Marriott that was never found again, and she's still never found. But, you know, there's been some cases, local campuses, you know, and anybody that has kids in college, especially females, you know, this is something that there's a concern, and there's probably a lot to be learned here, and we've come a long way. So definitely encourage everybody to read this book. I cannot wait to read it. Really looking forward to reading the book on the Hampton murders, because, you know, we really know the places there. So Rusty, why don't you transition us over to growing up in the same city, and we'll start talking about, you know, Smitty's better.
RPJ, Ron Peterson Jr. was a Northampton all-star legend. Tell us about those days, Ron. I don't want to hear about 38 zip. I want to hear about you crushing Mallory or in an all-star game or something. Tell me about that.
Wow. You know, what I remember most about playing was, you know, not myself, but how good some of the guys were that I played against, you know, and we were talking about some of your roommates, Rusty, but yeah, you know, you realize real quick, I mean, everybody was good in Little League, right? You know, or maybe they peaked at age
not Kirk
14 or
maybe
in Pony League at age 14 or 15, but you know, you learn really quick that just how good, you know, in a larger pool, how good people are. Anybody who's ever played sport at a college level, you know, realizes that. But you know, I was talking about coaches. You know, there's all of us can think of the influence of coaches. You know, that we had. Got a great. This is a good Bethel football story, Rusty, that maybe you never heard, but has to do with a couple older brothers as some of your teammates. But my senior class president at Bethel was a guy named Reggie Fullwood, who we mentioned his two younger brothers.
Yeah.
Then you also knew the Wallaces, who had an older brother, Eric, who
Eric we've had Jason on the show and Darren Fullwood on the show.
Okay, cool. Well, so the older brothers in those families, Eric Wallace went to the Naval Academy, played at Navy. He was 81 from Bethel. And then Reggie Fullwood, who was my class president, played at the Army Academy. So the 1983 Army-Navy football game, each of them played a really key part in that. And have you guys ever heard this story?
No.
This was
No.
okay. So biggest rivalry in sports, right? The Army-Navy.
Army-Navy.
1983 was the first year it was played out on the West Coast. The first and only year it was played at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California.
Mm-hmm.
And Navy had a really good running back that year. Do you remember who that?
Oh, yeah.
Napoleon Callum.
That's right.
Yes.
Napoleon Callum. Okay.
Napoleon,
So,
that's right.
And I'm going to tell this story because I've heard Reggie tell it every 5 years at our class reunion, and it's it's a good one. So McCallum was the guy who ran back kickoffs for Navy, and all week long, Army's practicing their kickoffs. They said, "Hey, we're not going to kick away from him. We're going to kick it to him. We're the Army. That's what we do. We can defend him on the kickoff." Rusty, you probably played on kickoff teams, right?
Yep.
And so Reggie Fullwood, meanwhile, was a freshman that year, didn't play a lot, but apparently had a good couple weeks of practice. And so the coach says, "Reggie, you're going to be on the kickoff team." So he was one of the guys. He was a defensive back, so he was one of the guys out on the end. So they're at the Rose Bowl, opening kickoff of the Army-Navy game, 1983. There's 80,000 people there. And the other guy back to return the kick with Napoleon McCallum, the other deep man, was Eric Wallace from Bethel.
Oh,
Right.
So you got these two Bethel guys lined up against each other, right? So they kick it to McCallum to open the game. McCallum gets it on the 5-yard line, and Reggie tells this story. He's going down. Everybody's keying on McCallum. They've been working on him all practice. They run a reverse and hand the ball to Eric Wallace. Okay.
whoa.
Eric Wallace runs right by Fullwood. All Fullwood can do is wave at him as he walks by. Takes it back 95 yards for a touchdown. It was the longest touchdown in the history of the Army-Navy game, and the only time the opening kickoff had been returned for a touchdown. And
Wow.
two of the guys were Bethel guys.
Yeah.
And nobody has heard that story.
That's a great story.
Wow.
Coolest thing.
No,
Isn't that
I
awesome?
didn't.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
That is
Ron,
cool.
Darren Fullwood is episode number 50. And you are going to be episode 62. But Darren told us, I'll be real quick, told us a great story that Frank Beamer's first win was against Navy, and Darren was number 18 and got lit up pretty bad in that game. So there you go. That is a great story. So now you played at Bethel. What position?
So let me just say, I'm sorry, Kurt, I do want to say this because Ron is still downplaying how good of an athlete he was. Ron, I'm telling you, I played youth baseball, and to me, anybody that could make the JV or varsity, to me, was a baller, because those were the kids that were killing us in youth baseball. I played in the WIF League, and I remember, I don't know if you've heard of Blair Wood. Blair was class of 86. He's at
Yeah.
Blair, I'm telling you, man, Blair is a good friend of mine. He went to VCU when I was. Blair was an amazing youth baseball player. And he's a peer, but I looked up to him because when he was on the mound or whenever he was sitting. So, right, if you were anything like Blair, and you probably were, like, you don't know how many guys are going, no, Ron could play ball. So, so I just want to get that. I know you were a baller. You're downplaying it, but I do have one.
Yeah.
Kirk, I'm going to let you talk. Let me ask you this. This is how did you play softball? Because we've heard about your father. We want you to tell us about that. But did you play softball after you got out of school?
I did, yes. And
you were a softball legend.
I don't know about that, but it's funny you mentioned Blair and I grew up 2 blocks apart from each other. There was a while we hung out together a lot growing up, and he was always, and you know how good he was, so he'd always play with the older guys. In fact, my senior year, he was the only freshman on varsity, and might have been the first freshman in the history of Bethel, to play varsity. So my joke with him is that he played varsity as a freshman, and I played JV as a senior. But I didn't know. But yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
you
I didn't even know you knew Blair. That's great to find
yeah,
out. We're
oh,
gonna have him on the
absolutely.
show.
And we've got a group of guys. We go out to dinner about once a month or every couple months or so, and it's been great to catch up with him. So absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned softball, and yeah, like a lot in most baseball players, they transition slow pitch softball. It's a bigger ball, easy to hit, not going as fast, right? And my father, the story with him, and the reason I tagged Junior on my name is because so many people, knew him. But back in the day, the 50s and 60s, fast pitch softball, like the girls play now, and you see them in the College World Series,
Right.
was a big deal. Was very, very popular. And in the city of Hampton, they drew about as many fans as the Peninsula Pilots do now. If you've been to their games, so they draw several thousand fans. They had a team and would recruit players from all over. And, that game, a lot of 1-0 games, 2-1 games, the pitchers throwing fast pitch would, throw it around 100 miles an hour. So my father grew up, Ron Peterson Sr. grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida. Back then, they didn't have Little League, so they had Church League, fast pitch softball. He went to college in North Carolina, played for a team there, a national caliber team. And they came to Hampton to play. There's a team that played out of Fox Hill.
Yep. Francis Asbury.
That's it. Yes. And that was where they packed the fans in, and they were a top 10 team in the country, the very highest level for many years.
Wow.
So the story goes, in like 1964, my father came there and came in relief one game with bases loaded, struck out the side on 9 pitches. And then in the offseason, they recruited him to come to Hampton. This would have been, again, like 1964. And he pitched for him. They did really well. And they wanted him to stay. So they found the prettiest woman in town, young lady in town, who was single. And that happened to be my mother.
I knew you were going to say that.
They got married, and I was born just about 9 months later to the day. And, so my early years were
that is cool.
Yeah. And so my father got a job at the shipyard. He had a college degree, so was able to get a job at the shipyard. And so he stayed here thanks to my mother. So those my early years were spent, down at that ballpark in Fox Hill. My first memories. One of their other really good players was Jess Kersey. You might remember the NBA.
Jess Kersey.
Oh, yeah.
And one of his, if not best friends, was Royce Bowden.
Yeah. Yes.
His son was my college roommate. It's a great friend of mine.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
Royce played down there, and then a guy from my high school, Gerald Trent Joyner. I think his dad was Trent Joyner. He was really good.
Hitter. Yeah.
And those guys that's why they were top 10, in the country.
They were. Yep. And then their niche, pitching was such a big deal, but then they would get a lot of other guys, local guys who played minor league baseball and washed out, would come and play fast pitch softball, and they have a handful of those guys. But yeah, I grew up at the ballpark there in Fox Hill with Brian and Todd Kersey. In fact, my dad and Jess Kersey were out in playing in a national tournament in Missouri when Todd and I were born in Riverside Hospital, and my mom and Mrs. Kersey had adjoining rooms, and their husbands were gone playing softball, which is kind of a story we joke about. But
where else are you going to get that story other than the Kirk and Byrd Show?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ron, you're going to keep blowing up. We know this. You've been on television, you speak. I know you're going to be on like Oprah, all these places, wherever. Like, nobody's going to hear that story unless they reference, hey, when you were on the Kirk and Byrd Show. So that's what the Kirk and Byrd Show can do. That is amazing. And we can relate.
Yeah. So one of the fun things that we do and we get really good feedback on is we kind of like talking about pop culture. So music, movies or cinema, and food. I got an idea. Since we all grew up in Hampton, let's actually start with food. What are the places that you remember that if they're still open, you go back to now, and some of the ones that have closed? And I know you've got some stories.
Well, in high school, there was a little pizza place on Mercury Boulevard called Vini's Pizza.
Okay.
The pizza was not good, but they would sell beer to anyone who was 17 or older.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So, that was where we would go. I guess my favorite place as I got older was Van Costa's right
Yep.
there off Tigatan Road. And my wife and our first house we lived for 7 years was in Merrimack Shores. So we would
Right.
walk to that place. So I enjoy going back there. These days, the place I like, Kirk, is in Phoebus, is El Diablo Loco.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, I know what
there.
that is. Yep.
Really, really good stuff. You know, there's not a Mexican in the kitchen. They're all gringos, but they put out some really good Mexican food there. But
Yeah.
so yeah, that's one of the things.
Cool.
Of course, you know, all
Hey, do you guys remember Steak and Ale
Yeah.
by the Coliseum?
Steak
Like
and
if we had a big occasion like my grandmother's birthday, or like we went to Steak and Ale, ooh, that was nice. Back in the day.
absolutely.
I don't know where I don't think it exists anywhere. But for me, we didn't eat out a lot, but when it was a big deal like the prom, we would go to Captain George's.
right.
Right there on Mercury, all you can eat.
Right on Mercury, all
Yeah.
you can eat. Yep.
Yeah.
Now I know both of you have been to Smitty's Better Burger down on King Street. Yes.
Yes, indeed. Sure. Yeah, it's the
Not
family.
you, Rusty.
No, I never went
Oh,
there.
you're deprived, man. It's like an old school drive up from like the 50s. It burned down, Ron, and they rebuilt it.
Yeah.
So, well,
yeah.
Right.
For
Way
us
better than
eating out,
Five Guys.
again, we didn't eat out much, but it was a big deal if we went to Ponderosa. All right, remember that on
Oh
Mercury?
yeah. Yes.
And my mom would take us to Sambo's, which is basically a Denny's that was down off Mercury near in Mercury and Riverdale.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Another
Yeah.
one, and we'll transition, is Wilkes Barbecue on the corner of Victoria and LaSalle. Best barbecue I've ever had still. So got a little window. You buy a little wrapped barbecue and a soda. It was like $1.50. And by the way, I was at Coach Newsom's house last summer, and Melinda told me that they had a party catered by Wilkes. They had all the stuff brought up here. So that's pretty cool. Now, the other thing that we like to talk about is music, Rusty. So why don't we go down memory lane with, let me just think, high school 83. So you should be right in the same neighborhood. What are some of your good music memories overall, and maybe some of the first, what was the first concert you saw, those type of things?
Wow. Let's see. I was I went through a country phase in high school. You know, country's back now. But I guess first concert would have been the band Rush at the Hampton Coliseum, which was phenomenal.
You know it's going to be Hampton Coliseum, so
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. One I wish I would have went to. I came to appreciate later. You know, I knew a lot of people that were Deadheads. They'd go to Grateful Dead concerts, and I was like,
there.
Grateful Dead, you know, come on. And you know,
Ron,
the
you
culture
can still
was
do that.
Yeah.
There are a lot
And
of
that's
people
when I
still
wish I'd
follow
have
him.
I wish I'd have gone to one of those Dead shows at the Hampton Coliseum, because I appreciate their music now, you know, but that's would have been pretty neat.
Did you hang out at the mall?
Pardon me?
Did you hang out at the mall? Mother's Records?
Absolutely, yeah. And as a kid, you know, Time Out, the video game place.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, Time Out. And inside the mall near Time Out was a burger chef.
Yes.
Golden
yeah.
Pizza was right next door. You get a Coke and a slice of pizza for like $2.
Yeah. Now here's some trivia. The sign from Golden Pizza in the mall, they had a sign that would hang down in a chain. It's now in Honest Pizza in Hilton.
Oh,
That sign is inside. It's kind of a
Oh,
nostalgic thing, but it's like a leaded stained glass sign that was really iconic, I guess, in the mall. It's kind of neat.
so yeah, we were talking about the Coliseum Mall, Ron, and you know, actually I can remember Star Wars was there, and I saw Full Metal Jacket there. Saw a number of movies, which Rusty, let's go. We always talk about movies and streaming. Rusty,
the biggest movie I saw at Coliseum Mall was Grease when I was a kid. Loved that movie.
You guys mentioned Blair Wood. I always tell him this. His mom loved that movie so much. She took us to me and him and his sister and her friends to see it twice. She probably saw it 8 times.
I saw like 3 or 4 when it first came out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I said on our last show, I had the soundtrack, the record. My brother and I would play that record over and over and over again.
Yeah. And back then, you could sit in the theater and they would come clean. They wouldn't say anything to you, like get out, and you could watch just the movie over and over again. And then I had a friend at Newmarket North that was a ticket taker. So we got a few movies there too. So
John Perez, he was on our show, a kicker at JMU. He was a ticket taker at Newmarket. I got to go to everything and could stay all day.
Wow. Kirk, talking about sitting in movie theaters, a really cool story I heard. You guys probably saw the series Breaking Bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just finished it. Yeah.
Okay. So the writer, creator, executive producer of that was a guy named Dennis Gillikin, who's from Richmond. And that was his thing. As a young kid, he would go to the movie theater, Regency Mall in Richmond, and he and his friends would, Saturdays and Sundays, they'd watch like 5 or 6 movies in a row. And that, that's how he developed a love for, for video production. And, probably one of the reasons he became so good and pursued it.
Yeah.
That's what he would do.
Do you have a favorite, or like say 2 or 3 favorite movies?
I gear more toward the 80s comedies, like Fletch, like what guy,
Caddyshack.
Fletch, Caddyshack. Yes, indeed. Some of the good murder mysteries. There was a movie that I really liked. It was kind of a modern film noir kind of thing that William Hurt, who passed away, played in it, but it was called Body Heat. It was
Body Heat. Kathleen Turner was in that.
Absolutely. Smoking hot. And
we would know. We were in puberty.
That's right.
Yeah.
But that's one. If I'm ever watching TV and it's on, I'll watch that. But it's just a really cool, and a murder mystery. One of those things that interests you there. That was a good one.
How about sports movies?
Are you streaming anything? Oh, we'll go get sports movie and then let us know if you're streaming anything.
Sports movie and then streaming, because they go together because there's so much. How about a sports movie?
Sports movie, the one that's taught me more life lessons is Bull Durham.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Rusty. You wanted to go.
I thought you were going to say Field of Dreams or Bull Durham. Yeah, that's it. Bull Durham.
Yeah, which I really like that. More tongue-in-cheek comedy kind of stuff. Is what good stuff.
What about streaming? As Rusty said, you watch anything now or?
Yeah. My wife and I are a little behind on that. We got through Ozark recently. We like that. Okay. Yellowstone was good, and right now we're going way back. Something we watched the first season of is House of Cards.
It's not that far back. Yeah, I haven't seen it.
You can't mention his name these days, but which is Kevin Spacey and Robin Wright. Some good actors in that, but a really cool, well done show there. How about you guys? What do you guys watch?
So I'm a sports guy, but my wife, like I told you, she's really into, murder mysteries, all those type of things, real life stories, like your true crime stuff. So I watch that with her all the time. But in terms of movies, I like sports movies. My favorite movie of all time is Hoop Dreams. And I forget, why am I forgetting his name now? But he's from Hampton. He went to Hampton High School and played basketball. He did that documentary, and that was like the first time I saw anything like that, and I was just like amazed. And I watched that like once a year and show my kids. He also did the Allen Iverson 30 for 30.
Yes, he did.
Yep, and he talks a lot about Hampton. But and the other thing, so I also like Remember the Titans. I live up here in Northern Virginia now. Remember the Titans, T.C. Williams, and I actually met Coach Boone. But right before the movie was out, I was at a basketball game with my uncle, and he had a hat on that said, "Remember the Titans." And my uncle said, "They're gonna have a movie about him, and Denzel's playing him." I'm like, "Yeah, right." Okay. I really did. So
that's right. Cool. Yeah, so I love Remember the Titans. I rent, but I own that one. I know it over and over and over again. And I like, I think Hoosiers is my second favorite. I love that because it's based on a true story. And then I do like Hoop Dreams. And I was going to point out one thing, and let's try to move towards closing, is this, that when that 30 for 30, the gentleman that did the 30 for 30, Butch Hopper was one of the key guys in Boo Williams' Summer League. Rest in peace, Butch passed away. But the guy from Hampton who did Hoop Dreams is talking to Butch Hopper and another guy about Iverson, and he clearly makes them unpleasant, and Hopper got a little saucy with them. But yeah, that is really good stuff. I tell you what, Ron, we would love
Steve James,
right? We would love to have you back on. Let's say this, maybe after we're able to read the books and the docuseries comes out. But once again, you can go to Ron Johnson, or excuse me, Coach Ron Peterson. Always have one of those, not live TV. RonPetersonJr.com. Go to Amazon. You can type in his name. All of his books will come up, and we would.
I'm going to get the audio.
Yeah, you get the audio book.
It's an Audible, right?
It is on Audible. Yeah, and that's, young people. That's the way all them. My son and his friends who are in their 20s. That's the way a lot of them, listen to books. They don't read as much as they're listening to them in the car or walking the dog or out running, or it's great way to do it. Yeah.
And real quick, you can find us, if you're still watching, you're hardcore fans, you can find us on the Kirk and Byrd Show on YouTube, and the podcast audio is Amazon, Apple, Twitter, and Spotify. Before we leave, there's a good woman behind every man. Why don't you give a shout out to your wife? You told me your son was an all CAA swimmer at William and Mary, and your daughter,
William and Mary. Okay.
We want you to brag on your family.
Well, that's very, very kind of you. Yeah, my wife is the best athlete of the family. She went to W.T. Woodson High School up y'all's way in
Fairfax.
Right.
Oh yeah.
She was their class of '83. She was most athletic in her senior class, and the male most athletic was Tommy Amaker. Yeah, she played field hockey at Radford, and then my son, you mentioned, he was a swimmer. That's he played all different sports when he was younger and gravitated towards swimming. Did really well with that. Swam at a national level and swam at William and Mary. Lived and worked in D.C. and recently took a job with Deloitte in New York City. So we're looking forward to going up and visiting him. And then my daughter, who's a field hockey player. She's at JMU. She doesn't play field hockey there, but she's a sophomore education major. She's majoring in special ed, and so she's going to do the Lord's work there, teaching special ed one day.
Oh yeah,
which is will be awesome. So, but yeah, we're blessed, and I appreciate you letting me give them a shout out, because I wouldn't be much without them. I know that.
Right. Well,
that is cool.
As Rusty said, we're very proud of you. We think you're going to rise, and we encourage all of our listeners to check out RonPetersonJr.com, order the books, and I basically know the Under the Trestle, but I've got to read the book. And Ron, thank you so much. I think we met our goal with time. We appreciate you having on. Fun guy to talk to. We didn't get into all the baseball people that we know. So next time, you and I were talking today about some of the guys that were phenomenal,
Oh, yeah.
Probably guys that didn't make it because of injuries that were very good and good enough to play in the majors. So thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on. Hometown guy, doing great things, and look forward to the novels that you're or the books that you're working on.
Well, thanks, you guys. You keep up the great work. I love your show, and I'm going to keep watching it. Love it.
Hey, we're having fun.
Hey, Brewing Pride. Hey, look, Ron, I'm so glad we got this and be online forever, because when you continue to blow up, I'll be like, that's my dog. I really know him. Ron, I don't know if it's official, but people can give you nicknames. So from now on, for me, you're RPJ. That's my man, RPJ.
RPJ. All right.
RPJ. Great. I like it. I never had it.
I'm gonna put you in my phone, RPJ. And so when people are like, you don't really know Ron, ask him RPJ. My dog. Thanks, Ron.
We've got a Phoebus guy coming on tomorrow night. We got a Phoebus guy coming on tomorrow night who's a trainer, played football. So we're trying to even up with the Bruins. But thank you very much, Ron. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys.
Take us out, Rusty.